The if statement in Excel is very useful when we want to include logical functions and return certain inputs in our cell addresses. In this simple example, we're just asking whether the activity code is 1. And if it's 1, we want Excel to return the input as yes. And if ever it's not 1, then we just want it to say no. So let's take a look at the formula bar here. So you would input equals if, and then this part, the first sentence of the if statement, is your logical function. So in this case, we want to put A2 equals 1. So we're saying if A2 is in fact 1, then we want B2 to say yes. If A2 is not 1, then we want it to say no. So let's test it to see if it works. So right now we have 1 in A2. So we would expect B2 to say yes because that's the true input. So let me change A2 to any other number, and we would expect B2 to return no. And that is what it did. So let's change this back to 1. And another example is a simple within budget and over budget exercise. So this column A, has all your budgeted amounts, and column B has your actual amount spent. And the status, we can use the if statement to see quickly whether we're within budget or over budget. So the first part, let's take a look at this formula bar here. This first part of the if statement is the logical function, and we want to test it. If B2, which is the actual amount, is smaller than A2, then we would be within budget. So we want to return the true value as within budget. And if this is not the case, if B2 is over A2, is greater than A2, then we're going to be over budget. So let's test it. So right now, the actual amount is lower than a budgeted amount, so it says within budget, right? So let me change this actual to over $600. Let's call it 620. And the status will change to over budget automatically. And then there's another more complicated way to use the if statement, and that is the nested if statement. And we use this when we have more than 2 logical statements we want to include, or more than 2 inputs. So I'm going to use a very simple example. So say we want Excel to read A2, the code number. And if it says 2, then we want to put hello in the greeting column. And if A2 says 3, we want it to say goodbye. And any other number, we want it to return a 0. So that's when we use the nested. So let's take a look at the formula bar to see how we write it. So we start with equals if again. The first statement is a logical test. So we're asking Excel to see if A2 is in fact 2. If this is true, then Excel will return hello in B2, where our if statement is. If it's not true, if A2 is not equal to 2, then we go into the second if statement loop. So we go in if, so we ask it again. So if A2 is 3, then we input goodbye into B2. If A2 is not equal 3, then we return a 0. So let's test it a little bit more. 2 would say hello. 3 would say goodbye, and 4 would be a 0. Let's change it back to 2. So I would encourage you to experiment with the if statement in Excel and see what you come up with.